The Arcane Formulas. By William Walker Atkinson. Lesson 8. Neutralizing Rhythm. In the arcane teaching we have seen the evidence of the universality of the laws of rhythm, cyclicity and balance. In the realm of the emotion and feelings these laws are as fully manifest as in the physical world. The arcane teachers instruct their neophytes in the art of mastering, controlling and applying these laws. Instead of assuming a negative attitude toward them, instead of meekly bowing and yielding to these laws, the advanced individual either neutralizes such activities as he deems to his disadvantage, or else transmutes or applies the laws to his own advantage and progress. Instead of allowing himself to be overwhelmed by the laws, as by a great ocean wave, he rises on the crest of the wave and rides to safety on it. The laws may be harnessed and made to work for the individual, instead of being allowed to overwhelm and master him. The general principles stated in the preceding chapter on mastering the opposites are equally applicable to the mastery of rhythm, cyclicity and balance. When the ego realizes that its real nature is centered and localized in will, then it is able to neutralize the opposites. And in the phenomena of rhythm, cyclicity and balance, the underlying principle is that of the opposites. For in rhythm we find a movement to and fro between the two poles of the opposites. In cyclicity, there is a circular movement imparted by reason of the poles, or opposites, of center and circumference. In fact, many cyclic movements are merely forms of rhythm, as we have seen in the arcane teachings. And in balance there is evidenced the presence of the two poles or opposites, the weights of each tending to maintain the balance or compensation. And poise. That great attainment is accomplished by preserving the right relation between the poles or opposites. So, you may see that in the mastery of the opposites the neophyte really acquires the mastery of rhythm, cyclicity and balance. The principle of polarity underlies everything. The law of rhythm is best described in the words of the aphorism, which informs us that everything moves to and fro in rhythm, between its two poles. Everything rises and falls in rhythm, within the limits of its nature. Everything advances and retreats in rhythm, within the limits of its power. On the plane of emotion and feeling the law of rhythm is constantly in evidence. We find that we swing like a pendulum between the extremes or poles of our feelings or emotions. Today we are sad. Tomorrow we are joyful. Today we are gloomy. Tomorrow we are bright and hopeful. Today we are slothful. Tomorrow we are active and energetic. A study of our emotions and feelings will reveal to us the fact that these mental states are like the ocean and have their tides. In and out. High and low. Flood and ebb. We find action and reaction ever evident in our emotional life. Moreover, we find that when we indulge in an extreme degree of any emotion or feeling, we have a tendency to fly to the opposite pole of that feeling or emotion. The law of reaction follows the action. The reaction may arise either from a revulsion occasioned by a sense of impotency or powerlessness to attain the object desired or hoped for, or else from a satiety resulting from the attainment of the object of the desire and the discovery that it was not what we had expected of it. We need not point to special examples of this, for the experience of everyone who reads these words will supply the necessary examples. Love, hate, or anger, if carried to an extreme point, have a tendency to fly back to the opposite pole with a startling rapidity. And, likewise, extreme elation is very apt to bound back to its extreme opposite and cause us to experience extreme depression. This is so common that the mere mention of the fact is sufficient to prove it to anyone. In the same way, many know that fear and courage have a tendency to react unto each other, if either be carried to an extreme. Many a man manifesting extreme courage will find himself swung suddenly back to a state of dire fear. In the same way, and from the same law, many have found themselves in a state of extreme fear. And then suddenly when they could proceed no further they would experience a sudden bound of desperation carrying them to a state of extreme recklessness and daring. The experience of soldiers have shown the bravest men suddenly possessed of a pitiful fear. The reaction from the courage. And, likewise, We see the manifestation of occasional bursts and spurts of reckless daring and startling foolhardiness from notorious cowards. We, personally, know of a case in which a man who was a self-confessed coward was suddenly overcome with such a revulsion at his own lack of courage that he sprung to the fore and performed a deed so startling, daring, and reckless that he won a special mention in the report of the battle, and was ever afterward regarded as a man of the highest courage. Persons who dwell principally on the plane of the emotions live in a state of alternate heaven and hell. Now enjoying to the fullest the upward swing, they revel in the ecstasies of emotional feeling until they feel as if they were indeed gods. Then comes the backward swing which plunges them into the hell of depression, melancholy, remorse, regret, or feeling of impotence and uselessness. The more emotional the person, the higher and lower in the scale of feeling does he travel. Those who are willing to pay the price of these extremes, the toll of feeling, are of course free to do so. But the individual who finds himself resting on will, his real nature, grows impatient and restless under the force of the play of his emotive nature, and is forced to take steps to master and rule that part of his being. Instead of swinging backward and forward between the poles of emotion and feeling, he seeks and acquires the balance and poise of the focalized will. The first step in the direction of neutralizing rhythm lies in the realization of the existence of rhythm itself. When one comes to realize that the hot fit is certain to be followed by the cold, the high by the low, the exaltation by the depression, the courage by the fear, the activity by the slothfulness, and vice versa, then does he cease to identify himself so closely with either of the poles, and, on the contrary, grows to regard them as mere natural incidents of his mental nature. He values them at their true worth, and refuses to allow his will to become involved in his emotion and feeling. He knows that his depression will be followed by a stage of reaction, and so he refuses to take his depression seriously. Likewise, knowing the truth, he refuses to allow his exaltation to excite him unduly. In short, he centers more and more upon his will nature, and from that position he stands aside, as it were, and watches calmly the swing of his feelings and emotions between their two poles. In a way, he detaches himself from the swing of the rhythmic emotions, and lives on the plane of will. This mental state may be figuratively pictured as the individual resting on the plane of will, and watching the swing of the emotional pendulum beneath him, on the lower plane. Without allowing his will to become involved, he neophyte may acquire this immunity from the effects of emotional rhythm by focalizing on his will. When he is threatened adversely by the emotional feeling, he will acquire a mental knack of rising above the plane of emotional feeling, or to the plane of will, and there calmly watching and observing the storm of emotion, without being influenced by it. It is like one sailing in a balloon above the storm clouds, which are thundering and flashing lightning beneath him. On the plane of will, there is peace and power undreamt of by those still on the emotional plane. But this immunity to rhythmic emotion does not come to the neophyte all at once. It is a matter of time, practice and growth. It is aided by the steady practice of refusing to take the emotional swing too seriously. Refuse to admit it as being yourself. Deny away its reality. See and think of it, always, as something connected with your mental being but not in any real way you, yourself. Stand aside and watch the play of your emotional nature. And before long you will be able to laugh at its antics. You will see how essentially unreal it is when compared with the mental life on the plane of will. Once even partially freed from the bondage of emotion and feeling, you will never willingly return to the old thraldom. This does not mean that you should never use your emotional nature. On the contrary, you will find it advantageous to play out the part often, for the energy aroused by the emotions are strongly motive, and will enable you to accomplish much if it is properly applied. But remember always, never allow yourself to become enmeshed and involved in the emotional storms or activities. Handle the emotions as a master does an instrument. But never yield yourself up to your emotions as a passive slave or instrument, any more than you would yield yourself up to the power and influence of some entity outside of yourself. You have a part to play in the world. A part which is as much of a character as that assumed by the actor. And in order to play it well, you will find it necessary to throw into it feeling and emotion, just as the actor throws these into his part. But the best actor always maintains a basic knowledge that he is merely acting, and his emotional activity is merely the result of previous thought and trained art. Art in the management of the emotion consists in selecting the emotional activity adapted to the accomplishment of the task or work on hand, and the restricting of all other emotions. Instead of being a blind tool and instrument of the emotional nature, you should use the latter rationally, selecting that which is desirable and helpful, and restraining the rest. Beware always of the reaction and return swing of the emotional pendulum of rhythm. When it swings back from a desirable emotion, do you then mount to the plane of will, and from there view it smilingly and with equanimity. Take what you want, and neutralize the rest.